In the annals of conquest, one name stands above all others for the sheer, world-breaking scale of his brutality: Genghis Khan. As the founder of the Mongol Empire in the early 13th century, he united the nomadic tribes of Northeast Asia and unleashed them upon the world. His military genius was matched only by his ruthlessness, forging the largest contiguous land empire in history. The Mongols developed a reputation for offering a clear choice to the cities they approached: surrender and live, or resist and be annihilated. The Khwarezmian Empire made the fatal mistake of choosing resistance, murdering Mongol envoys. In response, Genghis Khan did not just seek victory. He sought to erase the very memory of their civilization from the earth, initiating a campaign of total war. His armies descended upon great cities like Samarkand and Bukhara, slaughtering their populations without mercy. Irrigation channels were destroyed, turning vibrant farmlands into desert, ensuring the regions could not recover for generations. The core of the Mongol strategy was a calculated use of terror, a weapon they honed to perfection. Tales of their ferocity spread faster than their armies, causing many cities to surrender without a fight, precisely as Khan intended. During the siege of Nishapur, after his son-in-law was killed, Khan's daughter allegedly requested that every living thing in the city be killed. The Mongols complied, creating pyramids' heads to mark their conquest. The immediate result of the Mongol campaigns was a catastrophic loss of life on a scale never before seen. Historians estimate that as many as 40 million people perished, representing an estimated 11% of the entire world's population at the time. In the aftermath, his descendants established the Pax Mongolica, a century of relative peace that stabilized the Silk Road. This brutal conquest paradoxically led to an era of unprecedented trade and cultural exchange between East and West. Ultimately, Genghis Khan's legacy is one of profound duality. He was a nation-builder for his people and a bringer of law and order within his empire. Yet he is forever remembered as the world ender, the conqueror whose campaigns set the undisputed benchmark for human destruction, making him the most brutal conqueror in history. If Genghis Khan set the standard for the scale of destruction, his 14th-century successor Timur elevated brutality to a form of art. Also known as Tamerlane, this Turco-Mongol conqueror sought to restore the Mongol Empire's glory through campaigns of unimaginable cruelty. Based in the magnificent city of Samarkand, Timur was a paradox, a patron of the arts and architecture at home, and a demonic force of destruction abroad. Unlike Khan, who often integrated conquered peoples, Timur's goal was often pure subjugation and terror. His methods were designed for maximum psychological impact. After conquering the city of Isfahan in 1387, he initially spared the populace. But when a rebellion broke out and killed his tax collectors, he ordered a general massacre. His soldiers were each given a quota of heads to collect. By the end, Timur's forces had constructed more than 28 towers from an estimated 70,000 skulls, a ghastly monument to the price of defiance. His most infamous act came in 1401 during the sack of Baghdad. After the city fell, he commanded each of his 90,000 soldiers to return with a severed head, to prove that they had participated in the massacre. Those who refused were executed. When they ran out of adult males, they killed women and children. The resulting pyramids of skulls ensured that Baghdad, a great center of learning, would not recover for centuries. The aftermath of Timur's campaigns was total destruction. Sultanate in India resulted in the complete sacking of the city and the massacre of an estimated of 100,000 prisoners before the battle even began. As a direct consequence of all his conquests, historians estimate that his military campaigns were responsible for the deaths of 17 million people, approximately 5% of the world's population at the time. In the end, Timur's empire proved to be unstable, largely collapsing after his death. Unlike Khan's lasting dynasty, Timur's legacy was primarily one of death and destruction, a testament to his personal ambition. He is remembered today not for the empire he built, but for the sadistic cruelty he perfected, cementing his reputation as a conqueror who weaponized terror itself. In the 5th century, as the Western Roman Empire crumbled, its people lived in fear of one man's name, Attila the Hun, known to the Romans as the Scourge of God. He was the leader of the Huns, a nomadic people who became the ultimate symbol of barbarian terror. Attila forged a tribal confederation of Huns, Goths, and other groups into a devastating military force. His goal was not to occupy and rule territory in the Roman style, but to plunder its wealth and subjugate its people through overwhelming force. He operated more like a mafia don than a king, extorting massive tributes of gold from the Eastern Roman Empire in exchange for peace. When the payments stopped, Attila unleashed his hordes on the Balkans, beginning a campaign of pure destruction. His warriors moved with terrifying speed, leaving a trail of razed cities in their wake. Places like Naissus, the birthplace of Emperor Constantine, were so thoroughly destroyed that the site was lost for centuries. The Hunnic army's primary advantage was its cavalry, composed of master horsemen who could fire powerful composite bows from the saddle. This tactical superiority allowed them to overwhelm the more static Roman infantry formations. Attila's most famous campaign was his invasion of Gaul in 451. He besieged the city of Orleans, and his forces were known for their utter lack of mercy, slaughtering civilian populations without distinction. The immediate fallout of his invasion was the formation of an unlikely alliance between the Romans and the Visigoths, who joined forces to stop him. The resulting Battle of the Catalonian Plains was one of the bloodiest in ancient history, halting Attila's advance, but at a tremendous cost. The next year, he invaded Italy itself, sacking major cities and causing such terror that Pope Leo I was sent to personally negotiate his withdrawal. The reasons for his retreat remain debated by historians. Attila's reign of terror ended abruptly. In 453, he was found dead after a night of celebrating his latest marriage, having choked on his own blood from a severe nosebleed. Ultimately, his empire disintegrated as quickly as it was formed. Attila's lasting impact was not as an empire builder, but as a force of nature whose name even 1,500 years later remains the ultimate byword for barbarian cruelty. Before China was a unified nation, it was a land of warring states. The man who ended this chaos in the 3rd century BC was Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor, a ruler whose vision for unity was forged through absolute totalitarian brutality. As the king of the state of Qin, he embarked on a 25-year campaign of conquest. His massive, well-organized armies systematically crushed all rival states, using ruthless tactics to achieve what no one had before: the unification of the Chinese world. To secure his new empire from northern threats, he ordered the connection and expansion of existing fortifications into a single, massive project, the Great Wall of China. He saw this as essential for national security, regardless of the human cost. The construction was a death sentence for millions. An army of workers, soldiers, and captives was forced to labor under harsh conditions, with so many perishing that the wall became known as the longest cemetery on Earth. Qin Shi Huang's brutality was not limited to warfare. It was a tool of social control. To eliminate dissent and rival philosophies, he initiated the burning of books and burying of scholars policy, destroying countless philosophical and historical texts. Any scholar who dared to criticize his rule or cite past traditions was executed. Historical records say over 460 Confucian scholars were buried alive, a terrifying lesson to silence opposition. One of the first changes of his rule was the standardization of currency, weights, and measures, creating a unified state. However, his megalomania grew, culminating in the construction of a city-sized mausoleum for his afterlife. An estimated 700,000 workers were conscripted to build his massive tomb, guarded by the now-famous Terracotta Army. Many of these artisans and laborers were reportedly sealed inside the tomb upon its completion to protect its secrets. The Qin dynasty he founded was short-lived, collapsing just a few years after his death due to the immense resentment his tyranny had caused. This event reshaped Chinese history, as the succeeding Han dynasty built upon his unified state but rejected his extreme methods. Qin Shi Huang is remembered as the father of China, but also as a conqueror who waged war against his own people's minds. In the 16th century, the Grand Duchy of Moscow was dramatically transformed into the Tsardom of Russia by its first and most notoriously brutal Tsar, Ivan IV. His reign descended into a storm of paranoia and terror that earned him the everlasting title, Ivan the Terrible. Ivan was a complex figure, highly intelligent, devoutly religious, and a successful expansionist who conquered vast territories. However, after the death of his wife, he began a descent into extreme paranoia, seeing traitors and conspiracies everywhere. To crush all perceived opposition, he created the Oprichnina, a territory ruled directly by him and policed by his personal force of about 6,000 men, the Oprichniki. They were a terrifying secret police, clad in black, who rode with the emblems of a dog's head and a broom. The symbols were a declaration of their purpose, to sniff out treason and sweep it away. They became Ivan's personal instrument of terror, given free rein to arrest, torture, and execute anyone they suspected of disloyalty, seizing their lands for the state. Ivan's paranoia reached its horrifying peak in 1570. Convinced the prosperous city of Novgorod was plotting to defect to a rival power, he led the Oprichniki on a month-long campaign of methodical destruction. The sack of Novgorod was not a battle, but a systematic massacre. Each day, thousands of citizens, men, women, and children were rounded up, subjected to horrific tortures, and then thrown into the freezing Volkhov River. This act triggered a wave of fear across Russia, solidifying Ivan's absolute power. No one dared to challenge the Tsar, who had annihilated one of his own greatest cities. The estimated death toll in Novgorod ranges from 15,000 to 60,000 people. Throughout the span of his reign, the power of the old nobility was broken, and Russia was centralized into an autocracy that would last for centuries. But this unity came at the cost of immense human suffering and economic ruin. In a final, tragic display of his rage, Ivan struck his own son and heir with a pointed staff during an argument, inflicting a fatal wound. This act plunged him into despair, leaving his kingdom without a capable successor. Ultimately, Ivan the Terrible cemented his reputation as a conqueror of his own people. He expanded Russia's borders but left a legacy of terror and instability that would haunt the nation for generations. In the early 19th century, a military revolution reshaped southern Africa, led by one of the most brilliant and brutal commanders in history, Shaka Zulu. As the king of the small Zulu clan, he forged a powerful kingdom through relentless conquest and tactical innovation. Before Shaka, warfare among the local clans was often ritualistic with low casualties. Shaka transformed it into a system of total war, designed for the complete annihilation and assimilation of his enemies, a period that became known as the Mafeking or the Crushing. He introduced revolutionary tactics, most famously the bullhorns formation, which allowed his forces to encircle and destroy their opponents. He also armed his warriors with the Iklua, a short stabbing spear that forced them into brutal, close-quarters combat. Discipline in his army was absolute and enforced with lethal cruelty. Any warrior who lost his spear or shield in battle was executed. Cowardice was not tolerated, creating an army that was disciplined, aggressive, and utterly fearless. Shaka's campaigns were a whirlwind of destruction. He did not just defeat rival clans, he absorbed them. Young men were conscripted into his armies, while the old and those who resisted were systematically eliminated. His method was to create a unified Zulu identity by erasing the old clan structures. This was a brutal but effective form of nation-building that saw the Zulu kingdom grow from a minor tribe to a dominant regional power. The immediate fallout of his conquests was a massive wave of migration and chaos across the region. Clans fled from the path of his army, creating a domino effect of violence that destabilized all of southern Africa. The Mafeking is estimated to have been responsible for the deaths of 1 to 2 million people through a combination of direct warfare, starvation, and the displacement of entire populations. Shaka's reign ended when he was assassinated by his own half-brothers. His brutality had made him powerful, but it also made him countless enemies, even within his own family. He is remembered today as the father of the Zulu nation, a military genius who created a powerful kingdom. However, this achievement was built on a foundation of unimaginable violence that reshaped the destiny of a continent. Few names in history command as much respect as Julius Caesar. He was a brilliant Roman general, a gifted politician, and a masterful writer. Yet behind this celebrated legacy lies a darker truth. His conquest of Gaul was one of the most successful and brutal genocides in ancient history. In 58 BC, Caesar began his campaign in Gaul, a territory composed of hundreds of disparate tribes in modern-day France. His stated goal was to protect Rome's borders, but his personal ambition was to achieve military glory and political power. He was a master of siege warfare and logistics, leading his highly disciplined Roman legions to victory after victory. But what set his campaign apart was not just its success, but the systematic and calculated cruelty he employed. The public perception at the time, shaped by Caesar's own writings, was one of a heroic Roman general pacifying a barbarian threat. In reality, he waged a war of annihilation, often using starvation as a weapon against civilian populations. The core of his brutal strategy was to make examples of tribes that resisted. After defeating the Nervi tribe, he boasted in his own commentaries that he had reduced their council from 600 men to just 3, and their fighting force from 60,000 to a mere 500. During the siege of Avaricum, he refused to accept a surrender, and his legions slaughtered almost the entire population of 40,000 men, women, and children. He justified this as a necessary act to break the will of the Gallic resistance. In the aftermath of his nearly decade-long campaign, Gaul was decisively conquered and brought under Roman rule. This victory propelled Caesar to immense fame and wealth, paving his way to becoming the dictator of Rome. The fallout for Gaul was catastrophic. The ancient historian Plutarch estimated that over the course of the Gallic Wars, 1 million people were killed and another million were sold into slavery, out of a pre-war population of just a few million. Ultimately, the conquest of Gaul funded Caesar's political career and reshaped the destiny of Rome, turning it from a republic into an empire. It was a pivotal moment in Western history. However, his lasting impact is a reminder that even history's most celebrated heroes can be responsible for acts of profound brutality, cementing his reputation as a conqueror who built his legacy on the graves of an entire people. Alexander the Great is one of the most legendary figures in all of history, a military genius who, by the age of 30, had created one of the largest empires of the ancient world. But the brilliance of his conquests often overshadows the extreme brutality he used to achieve them. Ascending to the throne of Macedon in 336 BC, Alexander inherited a powerful army and a mission to conquer the vast Persian Empire. He was a charismatic leader who inspired fanatical loyalty, yet he possessed a violent temper and a capacity for utter ruthlessness. Early in his reign, the Greek city-state of Thebes rebelled, seeing him as an untested young ruler. To make an example and crush any further thoughts of dissent, Alexander's response was swift and merciless. After crushing the revolt, he ordered the city to be completely obliterated. An estimated 6,000 Thebans were killed in the fighting, and the surviving 30,000 citizens were sold into slavery. The city was razed to the ground with only the temples and the house of a famous poet spared. His most infamous act of cruelty during the Persian campaign came at the siege of the island city of Tyre. Frustrated by the city's stubborn resistance, Alexander ordered the construction of a massive causeway to the island. After a 7-month siege, his forces finally breached the walls. Enraged by the long delay, Alexander showed no mercy. 8,000 Tyrian soldiers were killed in the initial assault, and a further 2,000 men of military age were crucified along the coast as a warning. The swift outcomes of his brutal conquests were the fall of the Persian Empire and the spread of Greek culture across the known world, an era known as the Hellenistic period. Yet this came at a tremendous price. This act was punctuated by the burning of the grand Persian capital of Persepolis. While some historians claim it was an accident, others argue it was a deliberate act of revenge for the Persian invasion of Greece a century earlier. Alexander's empire was a personal creation, and it fractured into warring kingdoms shortly after his untimely death at the age of 32. His ambition had built the empire, but it could not survive without him. He is remembered today as a visionary and one of the greatest military commanders ever. However, his career is also a testament to the idea that conquest, even when hailed as glorious, is an inherently brutal and destructive act. In 1453, a 21-year-old Ottoman sultan turned legend, realizing a centuries-old dream, the conquest of Constantinople. Sultan Mehmed II, known as Mehmed the Conqueror, was a brilliant strategist whose ambition and ruthlessness brought an end to the Byzantine Empire. By the mid-1400s, the once mighty Byzantine Empire was a shadow of its former self, essentially reduced to the city of Constantinople and its immediate surroundings. However, the city's legendary triple-layered walls were considered the most formidable defenses in the world. Mehmed prepared for the siege with meticulous modern planning. He commissioned a Hungarian engineer named Orban to build a series of enormous cannons, including the Great Turkish Bombard, a monster cannon that could hurl 600-pound stone balls over a mile. To bypass a massive chain protecting the city's harbor, Mehmed executed one of the most audacious plans in military history. He ordered his fleet to be dragged over land on greased logs for several miles to relaunch them inside the protected Golden Horn. After a grueling 53-day siege, Mehmed launched an all-out assault. Despite a heroic defense by the vastly outnumbered Byzantines and their Genoese allies, the Ottoman Janissaries finally breached the ancient walls. The core event that followed was the brutal fulfillment of a military tradition. As was customary, Mehmed granted his troops 3 full days to pillage the city. What followed was a storm of destruction, looting, and violence. The resulting events were the death of the last Byzantine emperor and the fall of the city. Thousands of civilians were killed or enslaved. Great churches like the Hagia Sophia were stripped of their treasures and converted into mosques. As a direct result of the conquest, Mehmed made Constantinople the new capital of his empire, renaming it Istanbul. The fall of the city sent shockwaves through Christian Europe and is often considered a key event, marking the end of the Middle Ages. To secure his own power, Mehmed also codified the law of fratricide, a decree that allowed a new sultan to execute his own brothers to prevent civil wars and succession struggles, a brutal but effective policy. Ultimately, Mehmed's conquest reshaped the geopolitical map of the world. He is remembered as a visionary leader who established the Ottoman Empire as a dominant world power, but his victory was achieved through a brutal and decisive final blow to a once great empire. In 1519, the Spanish conquistador Hernán Cortés landed on the coast of Mexico with just 600 men, driven by a thirst for gold, glory, and God. His subsequent conquest of the mighty Aztec Empire is a tale of audacity, treachery, and the brutal collision of two worlds. The Aztec Empire was a sophisticated civilization of millions, ruled from the magnificent island capital of Tenochtitlan. Cortés was aware of his massive numerical disadvantage and knew a conventional military victory was impossible. To ensure there was no turning back, he made a legendary decision. He scuttled his own ships, stranding his men in a hostile land. From that point on, the only path was forward, towards the heart of the Aztec Empire. The Aztec Emperor, Moctezuma II, initially welcomed the Spaniards, possibly believing Cortés was a returning deity. This fatal miscalculation allowed Cortés and his men to enter the capital peacefully and learn its weaknesses from within. The Spaniards' core advantage was technological, steel armor, swords, cannons, and horses, none of which the Aztecs had ever seen. But Cortés' most crucial weapon was his alliance with rival tribes who had been brutally oppressed by the Aztecs. In a calculated act of terror, the Spaniards and their native allies trapped and massacred thousands of unarmed nobles and citizens in the city of Cholula. This sent a clear message of ruthlessness to the rest of the empire. After taking Moctezuma hostage, the Spaniards were eventually driven from Tenochtitlan in a bloody retreat known as La Noche Triste. This defeat, however, only hardened Cortés' resolve to return and destroy the city completely. The most devastating consequence was not from Spanish steel, but from a biological catastrophe. A smallpox epidemic introduced by the Europeans swept through the Aztec population, killing millions and shattering their social structure. In the year 1521, Cortés returned with a massive army of native allies and laid siege to the weakened capital. The city fell after months of brutal fighting, and the once great Aztec Empire was no more. Ultimately, Cortés' conquest reshaped the destiny of the Americas, opening the door for centuries of Spanish colonization. He is remembered as a daring and brilliant commander, but also as a conqueror whose ambition and greed led to the annihilation of an entire civilization. In the 15th century, the Principality of Wallachia, in modern-day Romania, was caught between two great powers, the Kingdom of Hungary and the Ottoman Empire. Its ruler, Vlad III, used so calculated and sadistic brutality to defend his homeland that he became a legend. Better known as Vlad the Impaler, his reputation for cruelty was not a sign of madness, but a deliberate and effective tool of psychological warfare. He knew his small army could not defeat the mighty Ottomans in open battle, so he waged a war of terror. He established his authority at home with uncompromising brutality. In a famous incident, he invited hundreds of feuding boyars or nobles to a feast. After the meal, he had them all arrested, impaling the older ones and forcing the younger ones into slave labor. Impalement, the brutal act of driving a sharpened stake through a victim and leaving them to die, became his signature form of execution. It was a slow, agonizing death meant to terrify all who dared defy him. His most famous confrontations were with the Ottoman Empire. When envoys of Sultan Mehmed II refused to remove their turbans in his presence, citing religious custom, Vlad had their turbans nailed to their heads. This act triggered a full-scale Ottoman invasion. As the massive Ottoman army advanced, Vlad used guerrilla tactics by poisoning wells and burning villages. His most infamous feat was a daring night raid on the Sultan's camp itself. What followed in the wake of the Ottoman campaign was a sight of unimaginable horror. As the Sultan's army approached the abandoned Wallachian capital, they discovered a forest of 20,000 impaled Ottoman prisoners of war stretching for miles. The sight was so ghastly and demoralizing that it broke the will of the Ottoman army. The Sultan, a hardened conqueror himself, reportedly turned his army around, conceding that he could not win the land of a man who did such things. Vlad was eventually betrayed by his own men and killed in battle. Though his reign was a chaotic mix of victories and defeats, his reputation for cruelty far outlived him. This event reshaped popular culture centuries later, as his bloodthirsty reputation became the primary inspiration for Bram Stoker's iconic vampire, Dracula. Vlad is remembered today not as a king, but as the master of fear who turned cruelty into his greatest weapon. In the 7th century BC, the Neo-Assyrian Empire was the most dominant military power in the ancient world. Its last great king, Ashurbanipal, king of Assyria, was a paradox, a scholar who created the first great library, and a conqueror who recorded his own extreme brutality in stone. The Assyrians were masters of siege warfare and psychological terror. Their state policy was to make the consequences of rebellion so horrific that no vassal state would dare to defy them. Ashurbanipal not only continued this policy, he perfected it. He was a cultured ruler who could read and write, a rarity for kings of his time. He collected thousands of cuneiform texts from across Mesopotamia for his grand library at Nineveh. These works preserved priceless historical and literary knowledge. However, the public perception he cultivated through his official records was one of a merciless warrior chosen by the gods. His palace walls were decorated with incredibly detailed stone reliefs that served as both historical records and brutal propaganda. These carvings are the core of his brutal legacy. They show in graphic detail the fates of his enemies. Captives are depicted being impaled on stakes, having their tongues ripped out and, most infamously, being flayed alive. In one of the most chilling images from the ancient world, Ashurbanipal is shown relaxing in his garden with his queen. Hanging from a nearby tree is the severed head of the defeated Elamite king, a grotesque trophy of war. The resulting impact of his campaigns was the utter devastation of his rivals. After a long war with the kingdom of Elam, he sacked their capital, Susa, and boasted in his inscriptions of desecrating their royal tombs and sowing the land with salt. Because of this policy, he crushed numerous rebellions and kept his vast multi-ethnic empire together through sheer terror. The Assyrian name became a byword for fear throughout the ancient Near East. But the empire was overstretched and built on a foundation of resentment. Shortly after Ashurbanipal's death, his empire was consumed by a massive rebellion, and his capital of Nineveh was itself sacked and destroyed. Eventually, Ashurbanipal's lasting impact is contained in the very reliefs he created. He is remembered as a conqueror who used state-sponsored terror as his primary tool, and who, unlike many others, was proud to document his own cruelty for all of history to see. In the 16th century, Japan was fractured by a century of civil war known as the Sengoku period. The man who began the violent process of reunification was Oda Nobunaga, a brilliant but ruthless daimyo who was known as the Demon King. Nobunaga was a visionary military leader who embraced new technologies and tactics. He was one of the first Japanese commanders to effectively utilize firearms, equipping his Ashigaru foot soldiers with arquebus matchlock rifles. His innovative use of volley fire at the Battle of Nagashino in 1575 allowed his smaller force to crush the elite cavalry of a rival clan. This victory showcased his tactical genius, but also his willingness to break from traditional samurai warfare. Nobunaga's greatest obstacle was not just rival warlords, but also the immense power of the militant Buddhist monasteries. The warrior monks of the Anraku-ji temple complex on Mount Haya had defied him and allied with his enemies. In 1571, and determined to end the threat permanently, Nobunaga surrounded the mountain and commanded his army of 30,000 to attack from all sides, sparing no one. The core event was a methodical massacre. His soldiers swept up the mountain, burning the temple complex to the ground and slaughtering an estimated 20,000 people, including the monks, women, and children who lived there. This act of utter ruthlessness shattered the power of the warrior monks and sent a wave of terror through his remaining opposition. It demonstrated that Nobunaga was bound by no code of honor or religious sanctity in his quest for unification. In the wake of his brutal campaigns, Nobunaga conquered nearly a third of Japan, laying the essential groundwork for its eventual reunification. He paved the way for his two successors, Toyotomi Hideyoshi and Tokugawa Ieyasu. However, his ambition and cruelty made him countless enemies. In 1582, he was betrayed by one of his own generals, Akechi Mitsuhide, and was trapped in a temple in Kyoto. Faced with certain defeat, he took his own life. Ultimately, Oda Nobunaga's lasting impact was that of a destroyer and a creator. He is remembered as the great unifier who ended a century of warfare, but his path to peace was paved with a brutality that earned him his demonic moniker. At the turn of the 11th century, Sultan Mahmud of the Ghaznavid Empire became a legendary and terrifying figure in the history of India. From his capital in Ghazni in modern-day Afghanistan, he was a patron of Persian culture, but also a relentless and brutal conqueror. Mahmud's primary military focus was the wealthy kingdoms of the Indian subcontinent. Driven by a combination of immense greed and religious zeal, he launched a total of 17 devastating invasions over the course of his reign. His campaigns were not aimed at permanent occupation, but were massive systematic raids designed to plunder the legendary wealth of India's cities and temples. These invasions were marked by extreme violence against the local population. The public perception of Mahmud, as recorded by his own court historian, was that of a holy warrior, a Ghazi, who was waging a righteous war against idol-worshipping infidels. This ideology was used to justify acts of extreme brutality. His most infamous campaign was the destruction of the Great Temple of Somnath in Gujarat in 1025. The temple was one of the most sacred and wealthy pilgrimage sites in all of India, dedicated to the Hindu god Shiva. After a bloody battle, his forces stormed the temple, killing an estimated 50,000 defenders. Mahmud personally smashed the temple's central idol with a mace, and his army looted a staggering amount of gold, silver, and jewels. The immediate fallout of his raids was the funneling of immense wealth back to his capital, turning Ghazni into a brilliant center of art and culture. This golden age, however, was funded entirely by the plunder and devastation of another land. As a direct result, his invasions left deep scars on the Indian subcontinent. The systematic destruction of temples and the massacre of civilians created a legacy of resentment and religious strife. This legacy would echo for centuries. After his death, the Ghaznavid Empire he had built through conquest began to decline, eventually collapsing under the weight of rival powers. This event reshaped the history of the region. Mahmud is remembered as a great patron of Persian literature, but in India, his name is forever linked to religious persecution and the brutal legacy of a conqueror known as the Idol Smasher. In 1066, a single battle changed the course of English history forever. William, the Duke of Normandy, crossed the English Channel and defeated the Anglo-Saxon king at the Battle of Hastings, earning him the title William the Conqueror. His victory was just the beginning of the conquest. The English people did not accept their new French-speaking king, and the years that followed were marked by a series of brutal rebellions, particularly in the north of England. William's grip on power was tenuous. The northern lords, supported by the Danes, posed a constant threat to his rule. Frustrated by their stubborn resistance, William decided to crush their spirit with a campaign of state-sponsored terror. The public perception was that he was a legitimate king suppressing unlawful revolts. In reality, the campaign that followed in the winter of 1069 was an act of collective punishment designed to make the region uninhabitable. This campaign, known as the Harrying of the North, was the core of William's brutal consolidation of power. With one terrifying order: destroy everything. He unleashed his army across Yorkshire and the neighboring regions. His soldiers burned entire villages to the ground, slaughtered livestock, and destroyed grain stores and farming tools. This was not a battle against an army. It was a war against the civilian population's ability to survive. What followed was a devastating man-made famine. Contemporary accounts recount survivors resorting to cannibalism, being sold into slavery, and dying in the streets from starvation. As a direct result of the harrying, the population of northern England was decimated, with an estimated 100,000 people perishing. The Doomsday Book, a survey commissioned by William years later, still recorded vast areas of the north as waste. In the end, the campaign worked. Northern resistance was permanently broken, and William solidified his control over England, replacing the Anglo-Saxon elite with a new Norman aristocracy. He is remembered today as the foundational figure of the modern English monarchy. However, his conquest was achieved through a brutal act of scorched earth warfare that left a deep and lasting scar on the nation he forged. From the skull towers of Timur to the scorched earth of William the Conqueror, this journey through history reveals that the path to empire was often paved with unimaginable brutality. Thanks for watching the video, and don't forget to like and subscribe and leave a comment.